What if I told you you're not tired? You're being drained not by your work, not by your environment, but by the subtle silent theft of your life force every time you say yes when your soul whispers no. Every time you overextend. Every time you feel responsible for someone else's emotions, you give away energy you were never meant to sacrifice, and they take it. Because you've been taught that giving is love, but never taught where giving becomes self-abandonment. You don't feel exhausted because something's wrong with you. You feel exhausted because something sacred inside you has been on sale for too long. And now, it's time to shut the shop. Let's make this clear: your energy is currency. And in this reality, you're either spending it with intention or leaking it through unconscious agreement. Every interaction is a transaction. Every smile, every reply, every time you let your phone buzz while you're trying to be present, your energy is being siphoned into the world. That's not a metaphor. That's metaphysics. You've been programmed to believe your worth is in your usefulness, that being emotionally available, constantly kind, infinitely patient, and always willing to listen makes you a good person. But let's be honest. How much of your light has dimmed just trying to maintain that identity? Because here's the truth you were never told. They don't love you. They love your energy. They love what you do for them. They love how safe you make them feel, how much you hold space, how easily you put yourself last. You became a haven for everyone but yourself. And now, you're full of other people's emotions, carrying their weight, processing their pain, responding to their needs before they even speak. You didn't sign up for this consciously. You inherited it. You learned early that love was earned through performance, that silence meant punishment, that presence meant availability. But that was never love. That was survival. And now your nervous system doesn't know the difference between love and labor. So, let's slow this down and get real. You don't owe your energy to anyone who demands it. You don't owe your voice to conversations that exhaust you. You don't owe your presence to people who only see you as a utility. You were not born to be accessible 24/7. Somewhere along the line you were trained to be polite before being powerful, to be nice before being real, to be needed before being nourished. But let me remind you of something. Your essence is not here to be consumed. Your spirit is not a public service. You are not a vending machine for comfort. And the moment you choose silence over explanation, the moment you choose no over guilt, the moment you leave a message on read not out of spite but out of sovereignty, you begin reclaiming your life force. But why is it so hard? Because you've built a persona, a social mask designed to protect the vulnerable you. Carl Jung called it the persona. The version of you the world finds palatable. It's the helpful one, the strong one, the healer, the fixer, the one who always replies with, "Of course," even when every cell in your body is screaming, "Please don't ask me that." And beneath that persona lives the shadow, the one who's tired, angry, resentful, hungry to be seen for who they are without having to perform for it. That shadow isn't bad. That shadow is the self you buried so others wouldn't abandon you. And here's the deepest truth. The more you suppress your shadow, the more others project onto you. They don't see your soul. They see the role you play for them. You become a character in their movie, a provider of comfort, a dispenser of reassurance, a mirror for their wounds, and you lose yourself. This is what they don't want you to realize. When you're over-identified with being the strong one, no one checks if you're okay. When you're always composed, no one asks what you're carrying. When you're always the listener, no one notices your silence is full of sorrow. So let me ask you, when was the last time you didn't offer help? When was the last time you let a call go to voicemail and felt peace, not guilt? When was the last time your no was loud, unapologetic, and sacred? Because every yes that isn't aligned costs you a piece of yourself. And that's not just emotional, that's energetic, that's spiritual. You're not just emotionally tired, you're soul tired. From years, maybe decades, of being everything to everyone but yourself. But here's what's revolutionary. Silence is power, not the kind of silence that's timid or afraid. I'm talking about lucid silence, the kind that says, I see your game and I choose not to play. Lucid silence is not withdrawal, it's energetic precision, it's the pause before the performance, the breath before the reaction. It's what breaks the spell of manipulation, because when you stop reacting, people have to sit with themselves, and most of them can't. They want your attention, your validation, your availability, because it saves them from facing their own emptiness. You became their distraction from their own pain, but you don't have to keep playing savior. You're not their God. You're not their therapist. You're not their emotional outlet. You're a sovereign soul. And when you stop explaining, defending, proving, or pleasing, the true alchemy begins. That's where we'll pick up in the next section. Because that silence, that pause, that refusal to rush in and rescue, it forces truth to surface. And not just theirs, yours too. You start seeing who people are when you stop performing for them. You start hearing what your body's been whispering when you stop filling the silence with noise. And in that stillness, something miraculous happens. You meet the self beneath the roles. The self who is not responsible for everyone else's comfort. The self who doesn't need to be understood to be valid. The self who just is. It's in that sacred quiet that you begin to understand how much of your life has been lived in reaction. You weren't responding to truth, you were reacting to expectation, to pressure, to trauma, to guilt, to the unspoken rule that says, if I'm not useful, I won't be loved. But that rule was never yours. You inherited it from a society addicted to productivity, from caretakers who only saw your goodness when it benefited them, from systems that equate stillness with laziness, boundaries with selfishness, and self-care with indulgence. So now, when you unplug, when you detach, when you retreat to silence, you feel guilt, not peace. You feel fear, not rest. But let me tell you something they never taught you. Guilt is not always a signal that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes guilt is the residue of old programming, the echo of a system that collapses the moment you choose yourself. You are not here to be a martyr for other people's healing. Your compassion is a gift, but it's not an obligation. You are allowed to say, I don't have the capacity for this right now. You are allowed to prioritize your peace without explanation. You are allowed to disappear for a while, to unplug, to disconnect, to reorient, without broadcasting your healing process. Because there's power in becoming unavailable. There's medicine in disappearing from the places that drain you. There's truth in the decision to no longer explain your worth. And that's what sacred isolation really is. It's not loneliness. It's reclamation. It's a homecoming to the parts of you that got lost in noise, in performance, in the endless loop of trying to be everything for everyone. It's the space where your nervous system gets to breathe again, where your spirit stops bracing for interruption, where your thoughts don't have to be filtered, and your soul doesn't have to translate itself into something digestible. You need that space, not as an escape, but as a return. Because the longer you go without solitude, the easier it is to forget what your own energy even feels like. You confuse their chaos for your anxiety, their urgency for your responsibility, their silence for your guilt, and just like that, you're back in the trance. So you retreat, not to hide, but to remember, to feel the weight of your own presence without distortion, to sit with your breath and not apologize for how deeply it fills the room. This is not selfish, this is survival. And when you do this long enough, when you remove yourself from the constant stimulation of being needed, being seen, being available, you begin to remember what it feels like to be. Start to produce, not to perform, just to be. And in that being, you meet the self you've been searching for in everyone else. The one who doesn't need approval to feel complete. The one who doesn't chase affection to feel alive. The one who doesn't audition for belonging in rooms that never honored your spirit. That self is your sovereignty. It's the part of you that can sit in silence while the world screams for a reaction and choose peace instead. It's the part of you that can feel someone pulling on your energy and choose not to respond. It's the part of you that no longer performs for validation because your worth isn't up for negotiation. You begin to understand the sacred power of your no. Not a hesitant no, not a polite, sovereign no. The kind of no that doesn't flinch, that doesn't waver, that doesn't feel the need to explain itself to anyone who's already chosen to misunderstand you. Because here's the truth. When you reclaim your no, you automatically reclaim your yes. You begin saying yes to things that feed your soul, not drain your spirit. Yes to people who see you, not just what you can offer. Yes to experiences that reflect your truth, not your trauma. Yes to the kind of love that doesn't come with a checklist of emotional labor you never agreed to perform. But none of this can happen until you stop reacting, until you stop explaining, until you stop negotiating your peace in conversations where your presence is only valued for what it provides. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to let people be disappointed. You're allowed to redefine yourself outside of the identity you created to survive, and maybe, just maybe, that's what this chapter of your life is all about. Not proving your goodness, not maintaining the illusion of being endlessly okay, but dismantling the idea that you must earn rest, earn love, earn space. You don't have to. You never did. And the more you embody that truth, the more your energy shifts. You move differently. You speak with clarity. You become less interested in explaining and more interested in vibrating from a place of truth, not obligation, not survival, truth. And from that place, you'll start to notice something miraculous. The people who only loved your usefulness will fall away. The spaces that thrived off your silence will collapse. And in their place, something else will emerge. Real connection, real rest, real reciprocity. But only when you choose you. Always without apology. You see, when you stop being available to everyone, something strange happens. At first it feels like loss. Like you're vanishing, like you're being forgotten, but what's actually happening is you're being revealed. Because without the noise, you start to hear your own frequency again. The tone of your real voice, not the one you use to please, to pacify, to survive. The rhythm of your true breath, not the shallow one you learned to manage other people's emotions. The pulse of your own presence, not distorted by the projections of those who never really saw you. And once you hear it, once you feel it, you can't go back. You can't unfeel how light your body becomes when you stop forcing conversations that exhaust you. You can't unsee the truth in someone's eyes when they realize you're no longer playing their emotional caretaker. You can't unknow what it's like to walk into a room and no longer bend yourself to make everyone else comfortable. You stop chasing comfort and you start choosing truth, even when it's awkward, even when it's quiet, even when it means standing alone, because being alone is never as lonely as being surrounded by people who only love the version of you that's convenient. That's the wound. You were taught to trade authenticity for acceptance, to shrink your needs so others wouldn't feel burdened, to morph your shape to keep the peace. And now, your spirit is aching, not because you're broken, but because you've outgrown the disguise. And let's be clear, disguise is not just about lying, it's about hiding. It's about laughing when you're actually hurt, saying it's fine when your heart is aching, nodding in agreement just to avoid the discomfort of conflict. But every time you do that, you teach your nervous system that truth is dangerous. You teach your body that honesty equals abandonment. You train your soul to whisper instead of roar. And eventually, you forget how to speak your own name without flinching. But here's what changes everything. You can start again. Right here. Right now. You can choose to speak not louder, but truer. Not to be heard, but to be felt. You can choose to breathe not just for oxygen, but for presence. for remembering what it feels like to take up space in your own skin without apologizing for it. This is how you start living from energy awareness. Not just watching what you do, but watching what you leak. Every complaint, every anxious over-explanation, every silent agreement to tolerate what drains you. It all costs energy, and your energy is your signature. It's your currency. It's your blueprint. It's the one thing no one can take without your unconscious permission. So you start paying attention. You start checking in. How does your body feel after that conversation? Did your stomach tighten? Did your breath shallow? Did you leave feeling smaller than when you arrived? And that's not just social fatigue, that's energetic theft. And the more aware you become of it, the more fiercely you begin to guard your field. Because when you're truly aware, you don't argue to be understood. You don't beg to be loved. You don't explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding your silence. You simply walk, not away from them, but toward yourself, toward your center, toward your sacred rhythm that's been waiting beneath the noise. And the beautiful thing about energy is that once you stop leaking it, it returns, like a tide, like a breath, like a child who wandered too far but still knows the way home. You start to feel yourself again, not the version you curated to survive, but the one that existed long before the world told you who to be, the one that remembers what peace feels like, the one that doesn't need to be needed in order to feel valuable, the one that doesn't fear being alone because being with yourself finally feels like home. And when you live from that space, when your actions come from presence instead of pressure, everything begins to change. You no longer attract people who drain you, because you no longer tolerate depletion. You no longer fall into dynamics that require you to overfunction, because you're no longer outsourcing your worth. You no longer say yes out of guilt, because guilt has been replaced by clarity, and clarity is power. The kind of power that doesn't need to dominate or control, it simply is. And that's what you are. You are. Without explanation, without justification, without performance. You are. And that's enough. In fact, that's more than enough. That's sacred. That's rare. That's revolutionary. Because in a world addicted to noise, presence is rebellion. In a culture that profits off your burnout, rest is an act of defiance. And in a society that trains you to self-abandon in the name of being liked, choosing yourself is the highest form of liberation. So the question isn't, how do you protect your energy? The question is, are you willing to let go of the identities that made you leak it in the first place? Are you willing to disappoint the people who benefited from your silence? Are you willing to stop explaining your no, just to be perceived as nice? Because until you are, you will continue to trade your vitality for validation. But when you're ready, when you finally say enough, when you choose peace over performance, that's when the shift begins. That's when the taking stops. That's when the life force you thought was lost begins to rise. And that rise, it doesn't come with fanfare. It's quiet. It's subtle. It begins in the moments no one sees. When you finally cancel the call you never wanted to take. When you let the message sit unanswered without a single ounce of guilt. When you catch yourself before over-explaining and instead say nothing. That silence is your rising. That pause is your return. That breath you just took, full, unrushed, and only for you. That's power. Not the kind that needs to announce itself. Not the kind that conquers, but the kind that grounds. The kind that restores. Because real power doesn't need to chase. It doesn't need to be recognized. It doesn't need to be loud to be felt. It just is. And when you live from that truth, your entire life reorganizes. People start treating you differently, not because they've changed, but because you have. Because your energy is no longer signaling availability to what used to drain you. You're no longer vibrating from need. You're vibrating from knowing. You start choosing where your energy flows, instead of reacting to every tug and pull. You stop showing up where your presence is demanded but not respected. You stop engaging in conversations that require you to abandon your peace just to be understood. You stop filling space just because silence makes other people uncomfortable. And you begin to witness something miraculous. Space opens up. Not just physical space, energetic space, space for real connection, space for creativity, space for joy that isn't performative. You begin to live from overflow, not obligation, because here's the thing about energy. It's never lost. It's just misplaced. Given too freely, spilled too quickly, handed to people who never asked how much it cost you to give. But once you become intentional, once you become sovereign in your yes and sacred in your no, that energy returns. It gathers, it builds, it starts speaking through you. Suddenly your body feels different, your thoughts feel cleaner, your choices feel aligned. You don't wake up dreading your day because it's not filled with people-pleasing performances. You don't end your day resenting everyone you served because you didn't sacrifice yourself in the process. You begin to know the rare, quiet pleasure of simply being without being drained. And when you taste that, really taste it, you can never go back to depletion as a lifestyle. That's when everything shifts. Because you're no longer navigating life from the perspective of who needs you, but from the perspective of what feeds you, not in a selfish way, but in a sovereign way. You realize that you don't need to prove your love through exhaustion. You don't need to earn your place through performance. You don't need to explain your boundaries for them to be valid. Your energy is sacred, and sacred things don't beg to be understood. They exist with quiet authority, and you, yes, you, are that authority. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need to give constantly to be worthy. You don't need to be useful to be loved. The right people won't love you because of what you offer. They'll love you because of who you are when you're not offering anything at all. And those are the people who will rise with you, not those who clung to your past self, the one who never said no, the one who responded instantly, the one who swallowed her truth just to keep the peace. Oh no, the ones who rise with you will be those who respect the pause, who honor the space, who meet your silence without fear because they know it's not distance, it's depth. That's the new vibration you begin to emit. Not reaction, not rescue, resonance. You stop being pulled into other people's chaos because you've chosen to live in coherence. Your nervous system isn't on edge, waiting for the next demand. Your heart isn't on empty, bleeding into people who never once asked how much you had left to give. You're no longer sourcing your identity from service. You're embodying your identity through presence. Because when you protect your energy, you protect your truth. You create a boundary that says, I am not here to be consumed, I am here to be experienced. I am not an emotional vending machine. I am a being, a spirit, a frequency, a living, breathing field of awareness that gets to decide what it entertains and what it releases. And from that place, your relationships change, your work changes, your creativity begins to flow again. Your body softens, your intuition sharpens, you begin to move through life as a conductor of energy, not a victim of it. You stop taking on what doesn't belong to you, that pain that isn't yours, that responsibility that isn't yours, that guilt that was never yours to begin with. You release the need to fix. You release the desire to be chosen. You release the role of healer, helper, hero, not because those things aren't beautiful, but because they became masks. And now, you're ready to take them off. You're ready to be seen, not for what you do, but for who you are when you're no longer performing. And who you are is more than enough. You are enough when you're silent. You are enough when you're still. You are enough when you're unavailable to anything that doesn't see your value. And from that truth, you no longer seek validation. You emanate certainty. You no longer need affirmation. You become the vibration. You no longer pour from your cup. because the cup is finally being filled. And that's how you protect your energy, not through walls, not through fear, but through presence. Pure, rooted, unapologetic presence. The kind that doesn't flinch when others demand access. The kind that doesn't explain itself when it walks away. The kind that doesn't shrink when its truth is misunderstood. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be available to be valuable. You don't have to be agreeable to be good. You just have to be real. And real starts with one decision: to stop leaking energy in the name of love. Because your energy is love. And love isn't meant to be drained, it's meant to be held, it's meant to be sacred. It's meant to be yours. There is something magnetic that begins to happen when you no longer rush to prove your goodness. You stop walking into rooms with a subconscious checklist of how to make yourself palatable. You stop looking at people as potential judges of your worth, and instead, you begin to ask the one question that changes everything. How does my soul feel in this space? Not, how do I look? Not, what do they expect? Not, what do I owe? Just, how do I feel? Because how you feel is the truth. It's the compass. It's the vibration you've been trained to ignore because the world profits off your disconnection. A disconnected person is easy to mold, easy to control, easy to manipulate. But a connected person, connected to their own body, their own truth, their own boundaries, they become unshakable. When you stop leaking energy, you stop explaining why you left that friendship. You stop apologizing for the peace you've built. You stop questioning whether it was too much to choose yourself. Because you begin to understand. Choosing yourself isn't rejection of others. It's the return to your center. And anything not aligned with your center will naturally fall away. Let the things that no longer match your energy exit without drama. Let the conversations that feel forced dissolve into silence. Let the people who only loved your giving walk away when the giving stops. That's not a loss. That's clarity. Because anyone who only stayed because of what you provided was never really with you. They were with the role you played, the illusion, the performance. But your essence doesn't perform, it just is. And it's magnetic. It draws in those who see you, not just what you offer, but who you are when you're still, when you're quiet, when you're no longer performing. That kind of presence doesn't need to chase, it doesn't need to convince, it doesn't need to carry the weight of being everything to everyone. It just needs space. And the more space you give it, the more real you become, not in a trendy way, not in a curated way, in an embodied way. You speak slower, you react less. You begin to trust that your silence speaks more than your explanations ever could. You begin to feel at home in your solitude, not as a punishment, but as a sanctuary. And when you look back at all the times you thought you were being rejected, misunderstood, discarded, you start to see something different. You weren't being punished, you were being redirected. Back to yourself, to the self who doesn't fear solitude. To the self who doesn't need to people-please to feel loved, to the self who doesn't say yes out of fear of being forgotten. And when you live from that self, you begin to create differently. Your choices come from wholeness, not fear. Your relationships become mutual exchanges of truth, not one-sided performances of care. You begin to attract what aligns with your frequency, not what you're willing to tolerate to avoid loneliness. And the loneliness, it changes, it softens, it becomes something sacred, something holy. Not emptiness, but spaciousness. Not abandonment, but freedom. Because when you are full within yourself, solitude becomes nourishment. It becomes the place where you remember who you are before the world told you who to be. And that remembrance is everything. It's what calls your energy back. It's what restores your nervous system. It's what brings clarity to your voice and gentleness to your boundaries. You begin to understand that you don't need to be louder to be heard. You just need to be aligned. And alignment is silent. It doesn't announce itself. It just is. People feel it in your presence. They feel it in the way you pause before you answer. in the way you no longer explain your intuition away, in the way you smile without overperforming joy. That's the power of someone who's called their energy home. They don't demand respect. Their energy commands it. They don't seek to be chosen. They choose themselves first. They don't live to be understood. They live to be embodied. And embodiment is the ultimate reclamation. It's the moment you stop outsourcing your safety to anyone outside of you. It's when you finally realize no one can steal your life force without your silent consent. So you withdraw that consent. You stop giving emotional discounts to people who can't afford your truth. You stop negotiating your boundaries just to be liked. You stop explaining your transformation to those who only knew the version of you built for survival, and instead you live fully, presently, on purpose, from a place that no longer needs to be explained or defended, because your energy is no longer up for debate. It's yours. It always has been. You just forgot. But now you remember, and the remembering is what makes you sovereign. It's what makes you whole. Not because you've cut everyone off, but because you no longer abandon yourself to stay connected to others. That's the difference. Connection built on self-abandonment is bondage. Connection built on mutual awareness, mutual respect, mutual energy integrity, that's liberation. And that kind of liberation begins the moment you stop being afraid of who you'll become when you stop being needed. You are not here to be needed. You are here to be real. And when you're real, the right ones will find you. They will not drain you. They will not demand you. They will not worship the role. They will honor the being, because they've done the same work. They've stopped leaking. They've stopped performing. They've stopped apologizing for the boundaries that protect their peace. And when you meet in that space, it's not about emotional transaction. It's about energetic resonance. You won't need to prove your worth. You won't need to manage their discomfort. You're just meet as you are, fully seen, fully received. And it won't feel like work. It will feel like coming home. There's a peace that comes when you no longer need to be everything for everyone. A deep, steady quiet that begins to settle in your chest when you realize that your life no longer revolves around managing other people's perceptions. That peace, it's not loud. It doesn't announce itself, it just arrives, like a slow tide washing over years of survival. And in that peace, something inside you softens. The hypervigilance, the compulsive empathy, the need to read the room before you read your own body. You start noticing when you're tensing your shoulders around people who expect too much. You start catching the moment your breath shortens because someone's projecting their fear onto you. You start witnessing yourself with clarity, no longer from judgment, but from compassion. You're finally seeing what your body has been trying to tell you all along. The fatigue wasn't laziness. The irritation wasn't impatience. The shutdown wasn't coldness. They were all signals, symptoms of a soul exhausted from being overstretched, overexposed, and undernourished. You weren't broken. You were over-accessed. And now you're reclaiming what was always yours. That reclamation doesn't always look heroic. It looks like turning your phone off at 8 p.m. and not checking it until morning. It looks like not replying to the text that demands a piece of you. It looks like staying home when everyone else is going out. Not because you're isolating, but because you're integrating. Integrating all the parts of you that were splintered across years of being needed, wanted, depended on. You're no longer fragmenting yourself into pieces to meet the moment. You're staying whole. And wholeness changes everything. You begin to walk differently, slower, more present, like your body is finally safe to occupy, like your nervous system isn't bracing for the next emotional request. You start smiling, not because you're trying to smooth things over, but because something inside you feels clear. There's nothing to fix. There's nothing to prove. There's nothing left to perform. And that's when the world starts mirroring that peace back to you. Suddenly the people around you become more grounded, not because they've changed, but because you have. Because your presence is no longer giving off the energy of pull from me, it's giving off Meet me where I am, or not at all. And that's not arrogance, it's sacred boundaries. That's what happens when you start recognizing your energy as a resource, not an obligation. Because here's the deeper truth. If you don't guard your energy, the world will spend it for you. They'll spend it on gossip, on drama, on distraction, on emotional emergencies that aren't yours to solve. And they'll never say thank you, because they never asked in the first place. You volunteered, out of habit, out of fear, out of that deep ache to be loved without condition. But love that costs you your wholeness is not love. It's dependency, it's extraction, and you're not here to be a fuel source for anyone else's avoidance. You're here to live, fully, deeply, without the chains of codependence wrapped around your throat, silencing your truth in the name of harmony, harmonious with chaos. You don't need to keep the peace by becoming the battlefield. You don't need to make yourself digestible for people who never intended to taste your truth. You're allowed to be full of your boundaries, full of your intuition, full of your voice, and full of your life force circulating within you, not leaking out into dynamics that never valued you in the first place. Because now you see it clearly. The more you give yourself permission to be full, the less you tolerate being emptied by others. You no longer settle for conversations that leave you second-guessing your worth. You no longer chase people who make you beg for breadcrumbs of affection. You no longer linger in spaces that mistake your silence for weakness. Because your silence is no longer empty. It's holy, it's alive with knowing, it's heavy with truth, and it speaks louder than any explanation ever could. That silence is where your power lives now. It's where your soul catches its breath, where your spirit recalibrates, where your mind stops spinning stories to justify why someone keeps hurting you. Because the truth doesn't need justification, it just is. And now, so are you. You are not a role. You are not a reaction. You are not a tool. You are a sovereign field of awareness. You are breath wrapped in skin and stardust, remembering itself. And no one gets access to that without reverence. Not entitlement. Not manipulation. Not guilt masquerading as care. Only reverence. That's the standard now. Not because you're rigid, but because you're rooted. Rooted in truth. Rooted in self-respect. Rooted in the knowing that your energy, your attention, your presence is the most precious currency you'll ever carry, and you will not spend it on what costs your peace. You will not invest it in people who bankrupt your spirit. You will not drip it into voids that never reflect your light back to you. You're done with that chapter. You've learned. You've outgrown the identity of the overgiver. You've shed the skin of the helper who needed to be needed. And in its place, you've found something real. Simplicity, clarity, presence, a quiet life rich in truth, untangled from obligation. A life where you no longer contort yourself to be loved. A life where your no is honored as deeply as your yes. A life where your rest is not just allowed, it's sacred. This is what it means to reclaim your life force. Not just by protecting your energy, but by understanding it was never theirs to take, it was always yours to hold. And now that you're holding it, your energy, your essence, your full presence, don't you feel it? The weight of it, the beauty, the magnitude? This is what they never wanted you to discover. Because a person who knows their energy is sacred cannot be manipulated. A person who guards their attention like it's holy ground cannot be coerced. A person who moves slowly, intentionally, choosing their engagements, their responses, their spaces, is uncontrollable. And that's what makes you powerful. You no longer answer out of urgency. You no longer feel obligated to soothe discomfort that wasn't yours to begin with. You no longer sit in rooms that make your spirit shrink just to keep someone else's ego intact. You've stopped diluting yourself. You've stopped translating your truth into a language that pleases those who never learned to listen. You've stopped fearing the silence that comes after you choose yourself, because now you understand. That silence is peace. You are not required to explain the absence of your old self. You are allowed to vanish from the places where you were only visible when you were giving, and when they ask what happened to you, when they notice your absence and feel entitled to an answer, you owe them none, because your transformation is not a group project. Your healing is not a performance. Your rebirth is not an open invitation to those who watched you bleed but never offered a hand. You see now that your light was never the problem, your boundaries were never the issue, your sensitivity was never the weakness. The problem was the story you were told about how much of yourself you had to lose in order to be loved. That love required sacrifice, that being chosen meant being useful, that presence meant constant availability. But now you know better, and when you know better, you begin to vibrate differently. People feel it. Some will be drawn closer, others will fall away. Let them. You're not responsible for the way your truth disrupts someone else's illusion. You're not here to make others comfortable in their unhealed parts. You're here to live honestly, to speak when it's real, to withdraw when it's necessary, to walk away when your energy is being harvested rather than honored. There's nothing wrong with you for being sensitive to energy. There's nothing wrong with you for needing solitude, for craving stillness, for refusing to engage in noise that doesn't nourish your soul. You've been called too much, too quiet, too intense, too distant. But what you actually are is awake. Awake to the fact that presence is precious, that your body tells the truth long before your mind catches up, that your boundaries are not walls, they're invitations for realness. Obviously, you've become fluent in the subtle language of alignment. You can feel when someone's words don't match their energy, when they smile but drip with expectation, when they flatter but seek to extract. You feel it in your gut, in your chest, in the spaces that tighten without reason. That's your intuition. That's your protector. And now you listen. You no longer betray that knowing just to keep the peace. You no longer suppress your truth just to be palatable. You no longer say yes when your soul is screaming no, because you've learned that every time you do, a part of you goes quiet, a part of you retreats, and you're done silencing yourself for survival. Now you speak when it's sacred. You share when it's safe. You give from overflow, not depletion. And when you feel the tug, the unspoken pull to explain yourself, to justify your absence, to make someone else feel okay with your evolution, you take a breath. And you remember. You don't owe that. You don't owe comfort to those who only loved the version of you they could use. You are not difficult for wanting depth. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. You are not broken because you outgrew who you had to be to survive. You are sacred, and sacred things are not handed out like candy. Sacred things are revealed, slowly, to those who approach with care, with reverence, with willingness to meet you where you are, not where it's convenient. So now, you honor your pace. You stop rushing into roles that don't fit. You stop responding to energy that feels off. You trust that who and what is meant for your highest frequency won't require you to shrink, silence, or self-abandon. And when the old patterns come knocking, the urgency to fix, the guilt for resting, the ache to be chosen, you recognize them not as truth, but as echoes. Echoes of an old you that no longer needs to lead. You're not here to rescue everyone anymore. You're here to be whole, to radiate, not rescue, to embody truth, not absorb pain. And when you do that, when you stop bleeding yourself dry for people who never learned to hold water, you begin to call in an entirely different reality. A reality where your energy is mirrored, not mined. Where your love is returned, not hoarded. Where your boundaries are met with grace, not resistance. Where your silence is not feared, but respected. This is what it means to be in energetic sovereignty. To live from a state where your power doesn't leak through unguarded channels. Where your presence doesn't get siphoned into performance. Where your identity is no longer a response to need, but an embodiment of truth. Then from here, everything begins to change. The way you speak, the way you listen, the way you move through space, the way you feel when you wake up in the morning, because you're no longer living for others' reactions. You're living in alignment with your own resonance. You're not asking, will they like me? You're asking, is this true for me? And that question, that simple, sacred question, is what rewires everything. It breaks the spell of performance. It unhooks you from the cycle of overgiving. It places you back in the seat of your own soul, the driver, the chooser, the sovereign self. And it all began with the choice to protect your energy, not as an act of fear, but as an act of remembering who you really are. Because who you really are has never needed to be anything other than whole, not useful, not impressive, not agreeable, just whole. But you were trained to forget that, trained to confuse your availability with your value, trained to believe that if you weren't needed, you weren't loved, and so you gave, and gave, until giving became your identity, until exhaustion became your baseline, until the idea of saying no felt like betrayal. But the only betrayal was the one against yourself, and now that stops. Because every time you silence your truth to keep someone close, you push yourself further away. Every time you override your intuition to maintain peace, you start a war inside your body. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you lose a little more trust in yourself. That's the real cost. It's not the time, it's not even the energy, it's the self-betrayal, the abandonment of your own knowing. So the question becomes, are you willing to lose others to find yourself? Are you willing to be misunderstood, to be authentic? Are you willing to sit in the discomfort of letting go, in order to come home to the self you were before the world taught you to perform? Because that's what healing is. It's not becoming something new, it's remembering who you were before you had to shapeshift to be safe. It's the radical return to your natural state, quiet, grounded, whole. The version of you that doesn't hustle for belonging. The version of you that doesn't bleed for validation. The version of you that knows, I am already enough just as I am, even when I do nothing. And the truth is, when you truly embody that knowing, your very presence becomes a filter. People who used to take advantage won't even know how to approach you. People who fed off your openness will find no entry. People who were only around because of what you gave will vanish when the performance ends. And let them fall away. Let their silence be your confirmation. You no longer need to fight for closure. You don't need the long conversation. You don't need to rehash the story or get them to understand. Understanding is optional. Alignment is essential. And if they cannot meet you in your truth, you are not obligated to explain it. Because your peace is not up for debate. Your energy is not a shared resource. Your time is not a communal space. You are allowed to be deliberate. With your words, with your presence, with your love. You are allowed to reserve your energy for what is sacred, for what is reciprocal, for what sees you fully and meets you with care, not convenience. And the more you do this, the more natural it becomes. It won't always feel like rebellion, it will start to feel like rhythm, like breath, like coming back to the body after being lost in thought. It becomes second nature to check in with yourself first, to ask not what do they need, but what do I feel? What do I want? What honors my truth? Because when you stop living in reaction to others, you begin living in response to yourself, and that changes the entire shape of your existence. Suddenly, your life starts to look like you, not a collage of everyone else's needs, but a reflection of your own values, your own frequency, your own sacred design. You start creating spaces that nurture you. You start having conversations that expand you. You start building routines that regulate your nervous system instead of keeping it on edge. You begin to live as though your presence is a privilege, not a given, because it is. And not everyone gets access, not because you're superior, but because you're sovereign. You no longer entertain energy that dishonors you. You no longer betray yourself for connection. And in doing so, you teach your inner child that their needs matter, that their voice is valid, that their silence is not a punishment but a power. You begin to reparent yourself in real time, with every decision rooted in self-respect. You show the part of you that once had to give to be loved, that love can be safe and slow and kind, that love doesn't arrive as obligation, that love is a mirror, not a demand. And this is what changes everything, not just your relationships, but your vibration. Because now you're no longer leaking energy through unspoken resentment. You're no longer vibrating from anxiety, people-pleasing, or guilt. You're vibrating from truth, from wholeness, from a space of deliberate alignment. And when you vibrate from truth, life meets you differently. You start to notice that what once drained you now repels you, that what once attracted you now bores you, that what once felt like love now feels like labor. Because your standards have shifted. Because you no longer measure love by intensity, you measure it by consistency, by peace, by how your nervous system feels in its presence. Because now you know real love feels like ease. Real connection doesn't rush your boundaries. Real presence doesn't require performance. And from this place you begin to attract people, places, and experiences that honor the energy you've reclaimed. Not because you've forced it, not because you've manifested it with perfect words or thoughts, but because you've become a match for your own truth, because you've stopped abandoning yourself, because you've made space. Space for rest, space for reflection, space for relationships that don't trigger survival mode. And in that space, you begin to bloom, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, naturally, because now you're rooted, now you're listening, now you're living in a way that feeds you first, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom. Because you've learned, you can't pour from a fractured self, you can't love from depletion, you can't be fully present when your spirit is halfway out the door. So you come back to your breath, to your body, to the moment. You come back to the knowing that your energy is your responsibility, your offering, your signature, and you will no longer give it away for free. And because you no longer give it away for free, what you give now carries weight. It's intentional, it's alive, it's no longer scattered or desperate, it's not a performance or a plea, it's presence. And when you give from presence, people feel it. They feel the fullness in your yes. They feel the clarity in your no. They feel the groundedness in your silence. And they either rise to meet it or they fall away. And either way, you stay rooted. Because you're not adjusting your frequency anymore. You're not shrinking your soul to make others comfortable. You're not bending your truth to avoid the fear of being left. That fear doesn't live in your body the way it used to. You've given it back to the past. You've stopped worshipping survival. You've stopped seeking safety in places that only ever offered you roles to play. And now you offer yourself something different. You offer stillness. You offer safety. You offer softness. Not just to others, but to you. To the younger you who never knew it was okay to rest. To the past versions of you who never knew they could say no. You hold them now. You speak to them with gentleness. You let them be seen, not just in your healing, but in your honoring. Because this isn't about becoming better. This isn't about fixing what was broken. This is about remembering what was sacred before it was conditioned into silence. You're not here to be perfect. You're here to be whole, to be honest, to be free. And freedom doesn't come from being untouchable. It comes from being unshakably rooted in your own truth. It comes from knowing what's yours to carry and what was never your weight. It comes from honoring your emotional bandwidth, not extending it beyond what's sustainable just to be liked. There is no trophy for being the most accommodating. There is no reward for being the most available. There is no medal for abandoning yourself the fastest. You've spent too long chasing invisible prizes handed out by people who don't even see you. And now you choose visibility over validation. You choose to be seen for who you are, not who you've trained yourself to be. You choose quiet over approval. You choose boundaries over burnout. You choose depths over drama. And in that choice, your world begins to rearrange itself. You stop rushing to respond. You stop feeling obligated to attend. You stop stretching yourself thin just to maintain a version of your life that was built on everyone else's needs but your own. You start making decisions that feel like peace. You start listening to your body instead of overriding it. You start trusting the no that comes from your chest, the pause that lingers in your breath, the pull towards solitude that doesn't feel like escape. It feels like medicine, because it is medicine. This stillness, this slowness, this sacred way of living that isn't frantic, isn't performative, isn't exhausting. It's nourishing, it's cyclical. It ebbs and flows. Some days you are soft and open, and some days you are quiet and unavailable. Both are sacred. Both are allowed. And the people meant for you will understand that. They will not take your boundaries personally. They will not collapse when you need space. They will not interpret your quiet as rejection. They will meet you in your rhythm, not try to force you into theirs. And if they don't, if they try to make you feel guilty for tending to your energy, let that be your clarity. Let that be the moment you remember just how far you've come. Because the old you would have apologized. The old you would have rushed to fix it. The old you would have collapsed your boundaries just to keep the peace. But the new you, the embodied you breathe through the discomfort. You let the guilt rise without acting on it. You let their misunderstanding be theirs to carry. Because you've learned that your peace is worth more than their temporary comfort. You've learned that you are not responsible for how others respond to your truth. And that's where your liberation lives. In the release, in the letting go, in the refusal to keep proving yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Your job is not to explain your growth. Your job is to embody. And when you do, your entire energy field begins to shift. You no longer attract the same situations. You no longer entertain the same dynamics. You no longer engage in the same patterns because your vibration has changed, and your vibration is the language of your life. So now you let it speak for you, not with noise, not with over-explanation, with alignment, with congruence, with the soft, steady pulse of a soul that is no longer afraid of being alone. Because you are no longer alone in your own presence. You no longer abandon yourself to be held by others. You hold yourself. You anchor yourself. You sit with yourself in the silence and realize it's not empty here. It's not lonely here. It's clear. It's clean. It's honest. This is the truth of who you are beneath the performance. This is the life that begins when you stop leaking. When you stop living in reaction to what others need, when you stop trying to be the healer for people who refuse to tend to their own wounds. Because healing isn't something you give away anymore. It's something you live, something you breathe, something you embody. And your embodiment becomes the boundary. Your peace becomes the filter. Your vibration becomes the gatekeeper. Not to shut the world out, but to let the right ones in, the ones who see you. The ones who honor your quiet, the ones who don't drain your field but add to it, the ones who know that energy is not a commodity, it's communion. And that's what you're calling in now. Connections that feel like safety, conversations that feel like exhales, environments that feel like home. Not because they require nothing from you, but because they reflect the truth of who you've become. And who you've become is someone who no longer needs to be needed in order to feel whole. You've stopped over-functioning, you've stopped overextending, you've stopped outsourcing your worth to the emotional comfort of others. You've come back to your body, to your boundaries, to your breath. And from here, you protect your energy not as a defense mechanism, but as a daily devotion to your soul. Because devotion to yourself means choosing yourself every single time you're tempted to disappear into someone else's storm. It means pausing before you absorb emotions that were never yours. It means witnessing the moment you start shape-shifting to avoid discomfort and instead choosing stillness, choosing presence, choosing truth. Not because it's easy, but because it's sacred. You no longer abandon your body to chase connection. You no longer give away your weekends, your evenings, your mornings just to keep being perceived as kind. You don't jump at every call. You don't feel the need to fill every silence. You're not rushing to apologize for your boundaries. You're not scrambling to explain your healing, because now you know. The people who belong in your life won't need a presentation. They'll feel your heart without you having to overperform. That's what energetic alignment does. It speaks before you do. It walks into the room and rearranges the dynamic, not by force, but by clarity. You're not trying to prove anymore. You're not negotiating the terms of your worth. You've stopped playing emotional chess with people who thrive on keeping you off balance. Instead, you sit still, you breathe deeper, you learn to love the sound of your own presence. And yes, that presence was once buried, beneath trauma, beneath over-functioning, beneath 100 tiny choices you made every day to be more digestible, more likable, more useful. But usefulness is not the same as intimacy. Being needed is not the same as being known, and now you want more. Not more things, not more validation, more depth, more truth, more resonance. Because the mask is heavy, and the role is old, and your soul is tired of being filtered through someone else's expectations. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to change the rhythm of your life without giving a press release. You're allowed to become someone you've never been before, someone who doesn't chase chaos just to feel alive, because now peace is the goal. Not just any peace, the kind that lives in your bones, the kind that doesn't flinch when people leave, the kind that doesn't question itself when boundaries are tested, the kind that doesn't apologize for needing space, solitude, stillness. And yes, some people will say you've changed. Let them. That's what you came here for, to evolve, to shed, to rise. You didn't come here to be stagnant. You didn't incarnate to repeat the same cycles just because they're familiar. You came to grow, and growth requires grief. It requires goodbyes. It requires releasing versions of yourself that were built on pleasing, on performing, on surviving. And what comes after? Stillness, clarity, and eventually, joy. The kind of joy that's not loud, not forced, not posted for likes. The kind of joy that lives in the quiet corners of your life, in the way you drink your tea, in the breath you take before opening your eyes. In the moment, you realize you no longer feel guilty for saying no. Because your no is holy now. It's not a rejection of others, it's a recognition of self. It's a declaration that your energy is not an infinite resource to be mined. It's a vow to yourself. A silent promise that you will not betray your own rhythm for the comfort of others. And from this place, you begin to live with a kind of power that can't be explained, a power that doesn't need validation, a power that doesn't seek attention. Because real power is presence. It's your nervous system no longer being hijacked by every vibration around you. It's your voice coming from your belly, not your fear. It's your intuition speaking louder than your conditioning. And every time you protect your energy, you deepen that power. Every time you choose pause over panic, every time you let someone else carry their own emotions instead of rushing in to save them, every time you stop mid-sentence and say, I don't actually want to explain myself. That's the reclamation not just of time, not just of space, but of self. The real you. The one beneath the roles, the one that doesn't need to be perfect, the one that doesn't need to be everything for everyone, the one that remembers, my beingness is enough. And that beingness, it speaks. It tells the world who you are without needing to say a word. It filters what isn't aligned without you needing to push. It brings to you what resonates and releases what was only ever held by a thread. Because you're no longer gripping, you're no longer convincing, you're no longer proving, you're allowing. You're letting go of control in favor of truth. You're choosing wholeness over performance. You're choosing rest over resentment. You're choosing self-trust over people-pleasing. And in that choice you rise. Not dramatically, not loudly, but clearly, undeniably. You rise because your soul is no longer bound by the need to be needed. You rise because your boundaries are now built on love, not fear. You rise because your silence has become a sanctuary, not a sentence. You rise because you remembered something essential. Your energy is the altar and you are the flame. You were never here to burn out. You were never meant to survive on fumes. You were never born too dim. You are here to radiate, and your radiance begins the moment you stop leaking. Because your radiance is not a performance. It's not something you switch on to be seen. It's what happens when nothing is siphoning your soul. It's what emerges when your energy no longer bleeds out through unspoken resentments, unconscious obligations, or the chronic fear of not being enough. It's what comes to the surface when you finally give yourself permission to rest without guilt, to speak without apology, to leave without explaining. This is what it means to be free, not untethered from the world, but rooted in your own frequency, unshaken by projections, unbothered by expectations, unavailable to anything that demands you abandon yourself. And it changes the very air around you. Your presence becomes medicine, not because you're trying to heal anyone, but because you've stopped needing to prove your value through service. Your very existence begins to speak a new truth. I am whole, even when I'm not giving. You see, you never had to be the strongest. You never had to carry the weight of every room you entered. You were taught to do that, conditioned to read the needs of others before your own, rewarded for over-functioning, praised for emotional labor that left you depleted. And now you're unlearning all of it. You're learning how to sit with your discomfort without fixing it, how to feel the urge to rescue someone and let it pass like a wave, how to choose solitude and not let it spiral into stories of rejection. You're learning that space doesn't mean abandonment, it means truth. It means the relationship is no longer built on obligation. It means you're no longer performing for connection. Because connection built on performance is never real. You know that now. That kind of connection only lasts as long as you can keep giving. It's conditional, transactional, and it keeps you tethered to a version of yourself that you've outgrown. So you let it go. You let go of the compulsion to respond immediately. You let go of the instinct to say yes just to keep the peace. You let go of the belief that love must be earned through exhaustion. And in its place, something softer begins to emerge. Something more true. A self that moves slowly. A self that chooses carefully. A self that trusts its own rhythm, even when it's misunderstood. And yes, there will be moments where the guilt creeps back in, where the conditioning whispers that you're being cold, distant, difficult. But you know better now. You know that every time you protect your energy, you're teaching your body that it's safe to belong to itself. That it's okay to not be everything for everyone. That it's okay to take up space without performing. And your body, it begins to respond. Your breath deepens. Your shoulders relax. Your chest opens. The tightness that once lived in your stomach starts to release. Because you're no longer contorting yourself to fit where you don't belong. You're no longer apologizing for being tired, for needing space, for saying no. You're no longer betraying yourself to soothe the discomfort of others. You're simply being. And that being, so clear, so rooted, so unapologetic, is the most powerful thing you've ever offered this world. Not your performance, not your productivity, not your perfection, your presence, your real, unfiltered, unmasked presence. And when you live from that place, you begin to realize just how sacred your energy truly is. You start asking different questions. Does this feel light in my body? Does this nourish me? Is this interaction reciprocal? Or am I only here because I feel obligated? You stop reaching for things that don't reach back. You stop accepting invitations to places where your soul doesn't feel welcome. You stop saying yes to prove your worth because you no longer confuse access with intimacy. You no longer confuse being needed with being loved. You no longer confuse being drained with being valuable. And with every choice you make from this clarity, your life transforms. Your relationships recalibrate. Your nervous system stabilizes. Your heart starts to trust itself again. You wake up in the morning with more ease. You go to sleep without carrying the weight of everyone else's pain. And it's not because you've stopped caring. It's because you've started caring in a new way. You care from fullness, not from depletion. You offer your presence, not as a gift to be taken for granted, but as something rare, something sacred, something that must be matched in depth and intention. Because you know now, when your energy is clean, your life is clean. When your boundaries are clear, your path is clear. When your voice is aligned, your direction is aligned. There's no need to force or push or chase. Everything meant for you begins to arrive on the frequency of your truth. Not the truth you perform, the truth you live, the truth you hold in your posture, in your pace, in the way you choose to protect your inner world. And that's where your real power lives, not in being louder, not in being more available, but in being so aligned that you can no longer be manipulated, so rooted that you can no longer be shaken, so nourished that you no longer need to beg for scraps of connection. And that doesn't mean you won't be challenged. It means you'll meet those challenges differently. You'll walk away sooner. You'll pause longer. You'll stop arguing with people who can't hear you because they're only listening for the version of you that no longer exists. You'll stop proving your worth to those who never saw it to begin with, because now you see it, you feel it, you live it, and from here, everything else is just a reflection. Because the world reflects back to you what you believe you deserve. And now, you believe you deserve rest, you deserve boundaries, you deserve love that doesn't cost your peace. You deserve to be seen in your fullness, not just your function. You deserve spaces that honor your depth, your silence, your softness, and you no longer feel the need to prove that to anyone, because you embody it. You walk differently now, not because you're trying to be powerful, but because you've remembered that you already are. Not the kind of power that dominates, but the kind that radiates, the kind that doesn't need to defend itself, the kind that doesn't collapse under guilt, the kind that doesn't ask permission to be. You know who you are when the noise fades. You know what you need when you stop performing. You know what truth feels like in your bones. And it's not loud, it's not flashy, it's not desperate. It's calm, it's deliberate. It's sovereign. That's the real you, the one who was never lost, just buried under years of shoulds and shame and survival. And now, the old cycles are done. The part of you that overextended for love is tired. The part of you that overexplained for approval is silent. The part of you that abandoned your own body just to be chosen is finally free. Free to rest. Free to take up space. Free to speak without shrinking. Free to walk away without turning around to explain. Because you don't owe anyone your exhaustion. You don't owe anyone your constant availability. You don't owe anyone access to your inner world simply because they ask nicely. What you owe is to yourself, to your truth, to the divine rhythm that lives beneath the conditioning. That rhythm will never lead you wrong. It's what tells you when something's off, even if your mind can't explain it. It's what pulls you away from chaos, even when your guilt tells you to stay. It's what speaks in stillness, in gut feelings, in dreams. And you're learning to trust it, to follow it, to let it guide your no and your yes, your exits and your entrances, your rest and your return. And the more you live from that place, the more life unfolds around you, not through force, but through flow. You stop chasing things that never saw you. You stop begging for clarity in places that only ever offered confusion. You stop hoping for people to love you in ways they're not capable of. You grieve it. You release it. You move on. Because now you understand you don't heal by fixing others. You heal by choosing yourself over and over again. And in that choice, your life becomes the medicine. Your breath becomes the prayer. Your silence becomes sacred, not empty. Not cold, but full of clarity, full of strength, full of self-respect. And there is nothing more powerful than a person who knows how to hold their own energy. You've become that person. You know what it costs to give it away carelessly. You know what it feels like to be depleted. And you've decided that your energy is no longer up for casual consumption. It is sacred. It is sovereign. It is yours. You're no longer trying to be easy to love. You're learning to love yourself in ways no one ever taught you. Through rest. Through boundaries. Through saying no when it's easier to just say yes. Through walking away when your nervous system says, this isn't safe. Through choosing peace over popularity, truth over performance, integrity over attention. And the world begins to shift around you. Not because it's changing, but because you are. Your lens is clearer, your standards are higher, your heart is softer, not because you're wide open to everyone, but because you're safe inside your own presence. That's what changes everything. The way you hold yourself, the way you speak to yourself, the way you protect the inner flame that never stopped burning, only dimmed by years of distraction, but not anymore. Now you're the keeper of that flame. And you don't let just anyone near it, because you've earned this peace. You've fought for it. In therapy sessions, in late nights full of grief, in lonely seasons where you chose solitude over self-betrayal. In moments where your voice shook, but you still said what needed to be said. You've chosen yourself so many times in silence, without applause, without validation, and that is the kind of strength that can't be bought or borrowed. It's built. And now that it's here, now that it's in your body and in your choices, nothing can take it from you. Not guilt, not pressure, not expectation. Because you are no longer performing for a seat at the table, you've built your own. And at this table, you don't abandon yourself to keep others comfortable. You don't shrink to avoid rejection. You don't leak energy just to be seen. You show up fully or not at all. You speak truth or you stay quiet. You rest without apology. You move with intention, because this life is yours. This energy is yours, and no one gets to steal it again. This is the new way, the quiet revolution, where your power isn't in how much you give, but in how well you protect what's sacred. And your energy is sacred. Your boundaries are sacred. Your silence is sacred. Your wholeness is sacred. You are sacred, and the world will adjust. It has no other choice. Because when you reclaim your life force, when you no longer play the role they gave you, when you choose presence over performance, truth over being liked, energy over ego, you don't just change your life. You change the frequency of the world around you. One boundary, one breath, one choice at a time. Your energy is your revolution. Protect it like your life depends on it, because it does.